Good evening, and welcome again to Public Perspective. Tonight we're going to take a look at some world affairs, as anyone who follows the news would know. The world is in a state of some uproar these days, all over the world as we look. But our guest tonight is someone who works tirelessly to try to alleviate that suffering and try to make some goodness in the world. Karen Abuzayd. Karen, you are a commissioner on the Commission of Inquiry in Syria of the UN Council on Human Rights. Is that correct? So, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Nice to be here.
Yes, and it'd be great if we had much better news to talk about in the world.
It would be. Then I wouldn't be here.
Well, you might not be here, right?
Right.
Actually, we'd be here congratulating you on the wonderful work that you've done. Right? So let's talk just a little bit about the Commission on Syria, and what is the purpose of the Commission, how long has it been around, and what have you been able to accomplish in the time you've been there?
I wish I could say something about the last, but we've written many reports. These commissions are created when there's a particular difficult situation for human rights somewhere, anywhere in the world. And this one was created in 2011 with 3 commissioners, and it is such a big issue that it's gone on the longest of any commission of inquiry in all the years there's been a Human Rights Council. So we present reports 3 times a year to the Human Rights Council sessions. We have this large team of investigators and analysts and so on who are full-time UN employees. We 3 commissioners are mostly older folks like myself, and we work pro bono. And so we go to Geneva 6 times a year to prepare a report and to present the reports. And in between, we try to visit the areas and where we'll find refugees in this case. So we're out in the field maybe 3 times a year to the region. So.
How long are you out in the field during those periods?
When
you go out to visit, say, Syria?
Yeah.
And you go
well, we don't visit Syria because they won't let us in.
Really?
Yeah, so we visit the refugees in the camps around Syria and other countries that are connected with we go to the Arab world, for example, and elsewhere in the Middle East.
Now normally these commissions last a year or 2, right? So
yes.
In the 8 years
yes.
this commission has been in place, do you believe that your reports have been able to have a positive effect, or when you deliver them, what happens?
Well, they've had no positive effect on the war itself, or for the people who are left inside Syria, or for the 5 million refugees who are outside Syria. No. The only thing we do is to continue to report, and we'll see whether they think it's worth it to keep us going even longer. As long as the conflict is going on, there is something to be said about it. And nowadays, when we go to Geneva, for example, we don't just prepare our report, we're also called upon to participate in panels and so on. One of the panels that's coming up that we'll be working on is the death notifications. One of the problems, people don't know if their relatives are dead or in prison or where they are, if in either
right.
case. And so there are all sorts of issues like that come up that people do want to talk about. And there's also a new mechanism that was created in this past year to take our materials and prepare these cases for prosecution one day in the courts. So we've been waiting for this to happen because, you know, we're accumulating masses of evidence, and we'd like it to be taken somewhere, and that some people are going to have to be held accountable for what's gone on in Syria.
Would that, but as an arm of the UN, though, I would think you need to be very impartial and look at all sides,
That's
right?
right.
And so usually in war zones like this, there are atrocities shared amongst all sides
That's
involved,
right.
And is that what, when you do these reports and these analyses, is that what you see, and is that what would be then reported?
That's what we report, yes. We report what we see on all sides. And of course there's some particularly bad sides, because you have the whole ISIS phenomenon there, and that's not going away. You know, the war is presumably winding down. Things are calming down some places, not everywhere, but ISIS is still around, and so there's a real big problem in some of the areas still, because people are still subject to these people. And although people, I think we've said here that we have conquered ISIS or something.
Yes, there is that claim.
Yes, well, that is something. But all right, maybe we've gotten rid of them in some places, whatever. But think of all the people the young men and even young women who've been indoctrinated by them, who still believe in them, who are dependent on them as well. So it's not a phenomenon that's going away quickly. It's very serious.
Now, when you're examining these events, like particularly in Syria, where there are lots of other foreign actors involved, the United States is involved, Russia is involved, Iran is involved.
Americans are involved.
Yes, and do you comment on that level of involvement as well, or its effects?
No, I mean, we don't point out what when we think someone's doing the right thing or the wrong thing, but we can say when things are going wrong and maybe who's involved in it, you know. And certainly when there are things like bombing and other sorts of things that are real atrocities, we might call out. But this is something that we expect to happen. There's something to be done about it by this other commission, the IIIM we call it. It's the mechanism for prosecuting, taking things to prosecution.
And there isn't there's some history of prosecutions for atrocities in the world, but it's not extensive.
No, that's right. I mean, how many can you do?
Yeah.
When hundreds of people, at least thousands of people, have been responsible for things that have gone on in just Syria, let's say. And we know that things all around and other places as well.
Well, it's interesting. So it makes me wonder. I don't mean to sound cynical about this, but why do the work if there will be no consequence or no change as a result?
I suppose it's to salve our consciences, you know, especially those of us who've been working on human rights, and like myself, working on I've been working in the UN on refugee issues for over 40 years. Well, that included some teaching at universities in Africa and before. So I think we just feel we have an obligation to carry on. We have a passion for it. We know enough about it that we'd like to share that knowledge. And so when we're called upon to do this, although it's really painful at times, and especially when it's gone on this long in this way, as I think I've told you, I spent 10 years in Gaza as the head of the UN Agency for Palestine Refugees. So I say my main two issues over the years, the recent years, have been Palestine and Syria. So I'm glad that I have grandchildren to make me laugh from time to time.
Because your day job is not very pleasant.
That's right.
Well, I would think also there's a sense that it needs to be documented.
Yeah.
Even if it can't be changed, it needs to be documented for
That's right.
future generations to understand. And as we today look back on acts of ancient barbarism that existed 1,000 years ago or 2,000 years ago, and we think, oh, gee, we would never do that today. And well, that's
we
worse. Would. But at least there's some recognition that maybe we should reconsider these things. Is that part of what motivates you?
Yeah, well, that's the thing. There are people still committing these atrocities, but there are people who are addressing them as well and calling them out, and I think probably preventing them some places, you know. It's hard to think of where. No, you know, we do know that, you know, wars usually end, usually, not always. Right. Yeah, some wars. So we can look to those as happy circumstances.
So tell me how you found yourself in this line of work.
Yeah.
I mean, it seems like an almost thankless job, though.
Yeah.
Personally, I'm glad that someone like you is involved in doing this. But how did you get into something that's this difficult?
Just to say before I tell you that it's not entirely thankless, because we know that there is an appreciation of it, and there is action taken sometimes. So, and we feel that maybe we've rescued some people from being exposed to the same thing, you know. Would say that. No, but I got in accidentally. My husband and I were at, I met my husband at graduate school in McGill. He was Sudanese, he was Sudanese. And we left McGill, Montreal, to go teach at Makerere University in Uganda. And that was simply wonderful. It's the most wonderful country because it has perfect weather all year round, 72. Yeah, I would live there anytime. But my husband, being a well-known Sudanese, was called back home to Juba to help start the University of Juba. when at the end of the Civil War, so it brought Northerners and Southerners together at this university, staff and students, half and half. So he went back to be the Vice Chancellor, first the Deputy and then the Vice Chancellor. And I went back to teach, as I'd been teaching in Makerere, Islamic studies and politics and so on. So, and then by chance, one of the colleagues went to UNHCR. And
the UN Commission on,
the
High Commission on Refugees.
High Commissioner for Refugees, and in Khartoum. We were in Juba, and I went to live with, to spend the summer holiday with my husband's family in Khartoum. And Rob, the colleague from UNHCR, said, "Could you help me out? You know, I'm with UNHCR now, and we have a good scholarship program from the United States, paid for by the U.S., to send Eritrean and Ethiopian students to university in Cairo. But I need some help, and you could volunteer. You're just sitting by the American Club swimming pool. Come on in." And I said, "Oh, yeah, I'd love to do that." So I did that, and 29 years later, I was still working for UNHCR because it's such a wonderful organization. You know, it provides a lot of opportunity to really address a situation and make a change. You know, you're helping the refugees they're fleeing persecution. They're there because they're in a real problem back home. And you make sure that they get an opportunity to at least make their way until they can either go home or go somewhere else, that resettling. That's why America is such an important country for this, resettling people.
Although we don't seem to be particularly open to that idea.
Not right now at the moment, but you've done a lot. And then we have our neighbor Canada, who's the best of all. You know, they take people and, you know, they have a family sponsorship program, and they have many more families wishing to sponsor refugees than the refugees who are available to be sponsored. And they really get them integrated into the community. They do all the right things. And Chicago has a good resettlement program. You know, they have NGOs that take care of resettlement, and refugees come here, they learn the language, they are connected with families and programs that can really help them. And, you know, the more people who are willing to do that, the better, of course.
Well, we've had several people on this show who are themselves refugees and have come in. And it is interesting to see that although there is, as you know, this current animus towards all immigrants, but these are people who come here and understand the opportunity that they've been granted, and they lead exemplary lives.
And they take advantage of it,
Take advantage of it, yes.
And they make good citizens.
Yes,
yeah,
very good citizens.
Yeah.
And we should welcome more of them, because
That's right.
They do make great citizens.
Yeah, they're not a threat.
No.
On the contrary.
Yeah. So, digressing for a moment into the refugee situation, as I say, we've had other people on the show who have talked about the refugee crisis, and there are somewhere between 65 and 70 million refugees around the world today. And that's an astonishing number. That's the size of a medium-sized country. They're all displaced. So you spent years in Palestine, correct? And so you are aware of the refugee issues there.
Yeah, that's a particularly bad situation because it's endless. Again, another one of those. What can happen that can change it? We don't see anything. You know, we don't see it getting better. We see it getting worse. It's different from other places.
And so, how does one react to a situation like that, where you look at it, you've been involved with it for years, and you see it getting worse rather than better? First of all, it would be very discouraging, I'm sure, but how does a professional such as yourself, in this case, I mean, how do you react to that, and how do you maintain optimism, and how do you try to move things along even if they seem to be going in the wrong direction?
Well, when you're in the middle of it, you can at least feel you're doing something. You know, I mean, being in Gaza, of course, with UNRWA, is a very special situation because it's like a mini government. Substitute government, working with the government in the same ways, and providing the schools and the health care and all of the things. So you know that you're doing something that's worthwhile. It's too bad you have to do it in that kind of situation where they are refugees in their own land, as it were.
Yes, right.
And you do the best you can. And of course, our government here isn't helping them by having taken away all the money last year. And it's, you know, it's just a miracle that they were able to almost make it up. They came, you know, the Americans took away $300 million, and that was a lot of food and a lot of schooling and a lot of health care. Anyway, they, at the end, they had a deficit only of $21 million. And so I think we need to congratulate them for having found, and for those who came forward. And it was especially from the third world, from Arab world and other places that just came forward and helped.
Raise the money
Yes,
that they've been.
yes,
That they've
yeah,
been
yeah.
and refresh my memory. What was our rationale for withdrawing that money?
Well, I think it has to do with Israel. You know, the pressure that comes from Israel, not to help the Palestinians.
No.
So, yeah.
Well,
yeah,
without going too far down
no,
that road.
let's not go there. Yeah.
Yeah, which seems.
Yeah,
kind
I think we could talk about some of the other situations
Right.
where, I mean, I think the most rewarding thing, besides Gaza, just by being there and then doing the human rights thing, which is a different angle, were the emergencies that I worked in, because then, you know, you have to work quickly, and you have to change things quickly, and somehow you manage to do that, you know. So as you know, I was in Sarajevo during the
Yes.
war, and we were, you know, UNHCR was responsible for feeding 4 million people. I was the head of the organization there, and, you know, we had airlifts and so on, and help from countries around the world, and we were able to help the people eat and move around and so on. So, and that's...
And, you know, things like that, like someone like me who has never been involved in anything like that, or certainly not at that scale, and you kind of wonder, well, you're in charge of this operation, you have to feed 4 million people. You know, do you just pick up the phone and call the president of France and say, or Germany, and say, hey, help out?
They come forward on their own, and I'm not picking up the phone. Somebody else is doing all of that. You know, we have a headquarters that really talks to the main people, and the people will come to see us or call us up to find out what we say from inside and sort of thing. But we have a big organization that's helping us, backing us up, and that sort of thing. You know.
So your job was to, once the aid got
to make
there,
sure it happens once it's inside the country, to make sure things move around if we have problems, because of course you always, and especially in Sarajevo and in Bosnia generally, and the whole region at the time, because there were so many factions and so on.
and there was war. The war was kind of spread out everywhere, right?
Yeah, it was. Yeah.
So.
And then you get over it, and you see they're more or less living peacefully, the different countries together.
Which would be a success you can point to and say, well, we helped to bring that about.
Yes, yeah.
So given that something like that requires a great skill in logistics, right? You need to know.
But so we have all kinds of advisors, you know, and logistics and something like that is, we had a lot of military people who were helping us with these sorts of things. They're good at that, yeah. But we have our own, I mean, UNHCR, has its own logistics people, you know, and it's, you know, it has everything, you know, fundraisers, logistics people, you know, human rights officers inside it, you know. The important thing too is to get publicity out, and we have, I mean, UNHCR has very good, you know, public information, you know, so that sort of thing.
So there's so many things I want to ask you about this, but it's about how you see yourself moving the world forward.
Moving the world forward. I can't say it's moving forward.
Well,
moving forward.
Yeah, well, it's moving. And time is elapsing, and it's not reversing.
It's going in the wrong direction in a lot of places, though. I mean, some of the things that are coming up now, you would have thought, I would have thought 10 years ago wouldn't happen. You know, when we talk about Myanmar and the Rohingya refugees, for example, how awful this is, you know, that this can happen and so on. And I think of the various situations I was in, especially around Africa. I have to tell my favorite story, if I can.
Please.
Okay. I was pulled out of Namibia, where I went after being with UNHCR in Sudan. So I was pulled out of, I went sent to Namibia. Now, Namibia is a repatriation operation. I was bringing the Namibians home from Angola. So that was wonderful. And whenever you're in a repatriation, you're solving the problem. It's over, and it's exciting and wonderful. But then, of course, they didn't want to let me stay there too long. That was too nice. So there were these 100,000 Liberians coming into Sierra Leone So I went there and get to the border, and these 100,000 people are coming in. Sierra Leone was a country which doesn't have much infrastructure even now, but didn't it then at all. So there weren't roads, there weren't, good roads anyway. There weren't vehicles to move these people or anything. So the Red Cross, the American Red Cross, was our implementing partner, as we call them. And we devised a scheme to put these 100,000 people in 600 villages along the border of Sierra Leone. And they were welcomed by the people, because there's some, they were their neighbors, really.
Yeah.
But also, we dug a well, we built a classroom, and we brought food, and we shared it. And so this was, it was the most wonderful thing. Then, of course, the Civil War started inside Sierra Leone. We had to move the refugees. We still don't have trucks and cars and buses and roads. So we walked the people across the country to where we had built the refugee camps near the capital. And they walked across without complaint. We had cars and things to pick up the ill and the sick and the tired, whatever.
Right.
But
and how far a distance was this?
A couple hundred miles.
They walked several hundred miles.
Couple hundred miles, yeah.
Still,
yeah.
that's a lot.
Stopped. They didn't walk without stop.
No,
but, that could happen somewhere.
Yeah.
No, but I just think that's the kind of thing you'll find with people who have nothing themselves and who welcome the refugees, and the refugees then who have to take another trek, and they do it. People are very strong and very. We always say there's two things that describe refugees, two adjectives. One is resilient, and it gets to be old, but it's true. And the other is their steadfastness. They don't give up. They don't give in. They'll.
I've mentioned I've had other guests on the show. Several different of the lost boys in Sudan.
Yes.
As youngsters, spent years in the desert.
Yes.
Again, on foot,
yeah.
walking and going from one place to another, avoiding the predatory, avoiding lions, avoiding the mosquitoes, avoiding the armed forces who wanted to conscript or kill them. And I always have the same questions, like, how on earth did you do that? And the answer is, well, we had no choice. And so they did.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, and I
but
think
they do it willingly. They don't fuss and complain.
And that's something I've noted about the people I've had on the show, how they treat it as though it's no big deal. Like, well, no, of course we did that. Well, we had to, and so we did.
Yeah.
And they don't feel that that's extraordinary. They don't feel that they did anything extraordinary.
They're very modest, yes.
Yes, and to me that's extraordinary,
Yeah.
that you could step up to that extent and endure those kinds of conditions and just kind of let it roll off your back. And sometimes we here in the country go apoplectic because the traffic's bad.
Yes, trying to get here tonight.
Yeah, true. Yeah, it was tough.
Yes, right.
So one of the things I think about, you have been so involved in these activities, and some of them have been successes, as you pointed out, and yet I think the average American knows very little about them, and knows actually very little about the UN.
Yes, I see that now that I'm back home. Yeah.
And we've had, administrations in Washington that feel the UN is the enemy, and so.
There's some people in the administrations. You always find some people who understand, I think.
I'm
you
sure
don't always succeed at getting what you want, but I mean, it's not terrible. I was the head of the Washington office for 2 years as well. And so that was difficult.
Yes, I can imagine.
It was bad enough working in my own headquarters, but having to try to raise money and convince people in Washington was difficult.
It sort of makes me wonder, which is worse, being in Sarajevo during the war or being in Washington at any time?
Washington. No, headquarters, nobody, if you're a refugee worker, you don't want to work in headquarters.
No,
you want to be out in the field.
In the field, working with people who need it. Right.
Yeah.
So, how long do you plan to keep doing this? It seems like it would wear you out at some point, but you seem like you're still as ready as ever.
At my age, I should be worn out. I don't know. Well, as long as they want us, as long as they keep renewing the Syria Commission, we keep saying, do you think they'll have us for another year? Because we're not cheap, for one thing, because we have this big team behind us, and we do a lot of traveling ourselves, and so it's a big deal, really.
Now
But
they reimburse you for your travel, right? Or is that?
oh yeah, no, we don't get a salary, but we get what we call DSA, daily subsistence allowance, and yeah, they pay that, and they pay the travel and so on. So yeah, no, it's all right. We're happy with that, but yeah, but I think you keep going because you know there's still a problem, and you do kind of know enough about it that you should be there maybe, and you're interested enough, of course, and I think, and especially I think we get interested in particular parts of the world because we've worked there and we know the people, and so we keep interested. We keep up. I have my husband, my older son lives in Sudan. My younger son lives here, which is why he has grandchildren. That's why I'm here.
Yes.
Yeah. So he has children. I have grandchildren.
Yeah.
So you got that.
Right.
So I have a big family in Sudan as well. So it keeps me in touch with the region and so on. Yeah.
Which gives you another reason to keep traveling back and forth.
Yes.
Right. Right. So what do you?
So does the weather, by the way.
So what do you hope to accomplish going forward? And what do you do after this commission? if it ever winds down?
I don't think there'll be an after. Yeah, there'll be something else.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't think about it because you know, too deeply involved in what's going on now, and know that there's something else around the corner if I want to keep going, which you probably will. Yeah, you get hooked on these things, I think.
Yes, I can see that from the way you talk about them, and how it gives you that sense of purpose to keep going.
Well, and you're so rewarded, you know, the people, it's, you know, as I've described, the people who just keep going, you know, no matter what, no matter what's been happening to them. And yeah, you have to admire that and help it whatever way you can, I think.
Well, one of the other things that strikes me is that you yourself are very humble about what you've done, and yet if you were to write up your resume about here's all the things I've done, it's pretty impressive. And yet, to talk to you here, sort of like the refugees, like, well, it's no big deal, you know, like somebody had to do it, so it was me. Right?
Yeah, well, I sometimes, when I look back, I think, how did I do that, you know? how was I daring enough to take that on, you know? Yeah, but I mean, there are always helpers all around, and, you know, by now, you know. And as you know, you talked about seeing the lost boys. There's some lost girls, too. Had a little bit to do with them when I was in New York for a year as a special advisor to the Secretary General for the Global Compacts on Refugees and Migration. So we met a lot of people in New York, and some of them were lost girls, and they had really horrible tales to tell. And so, you know,
well, we'll have to save that for another show.
Okay.
Because we're already
Let's
out
do
of
that.
time.
Yeah.
Karen, it's been such an honor to have you here.
Oh, thank you. It's an honor to be here. Thank you.
And I learned so much by talking with people like you who have been through things that I can't imagine, but again, take them just
Well, it's wonderful when people are interested, I think, though, and you help them, other people who are listening. Yeah.
So thank you again for being here.
Oh, my
as
pleasure.
guest.
Yeah, thank you.
And thank you for joining us once again on Public Perspective. I'm your host, Kevin McDermott. You can see us every Saturday night at 8 on Comcast Channel 19 or find us on the web at publicperspective.tv. So till next time, thank you and good night.